June 24th, 2017. My Hero Academia had just aired its 26th episode, where our fledgling heroes pick some names and head off to their work studies. It was also here that it was announced that the anime would take a 2-week break before heading into the next arc. I, coming off the heels of the phenomenal sports festival, didn't want to wait that long, so I caved and read the manga. Suffice to say, I kinda liked it. But among the many things that I ended up loving in this manga, there was one character that stuck with me, one person who really had no business being as popular and as intriguing as he ended up being. This was, of course, Dabi, holder of the Blue Flame and the local Frankenstein's monster cosplayer. This might be one of the most overanalyzed and over-theorized characters I have ever come across, perhaps on par with the crazy nonsense we had going on before Tobi in Naruto got his reveal. Every time this stench lord came onto the page, me and numerous others started pointing fingers, screaming "him!" and scrambling to fit every word he spoke and every step he took into our theories regarding his identity and role in the plot. Every single time. And now, at least one part of that, his identity, has been revealed. This doesn't mean the theorizing will stop, as there are still countless unanswered questions up in the air, but it does mean that a multiple year-long saga has come to an end. So, for the occasion, I would like to do a little retrospective. This isn't really going to be an analysis video per se, but rather just me going through the various clues and foreshadowings, how the fans reacted, how I reacted, and how reasonable/unreasonable and fun it all was, piecing together how this twist worked and how I experienced it. So, join me today as we reminisce about the Dabi experience. Now, I came into the manga kind of late, so our story has to actually start before my entry into the source material. The Dabi experience started all the way back on August 8th, 2015 with My Hero Academia chapter 57. This chapter only gave us 2 glimpses at the character, as this is technically before his proper introduction. However, one interesting thing to note here was a detail in the very first panel this figure appears in. While it isn't completely visible in the manga, the anime's more detailed background shots showed and confirmed that this character is walking out of what seems to be a beauty salon. You know, the place where you'd get hair dye. As the Stain arc ramps down following the eponymous villain's defeat, Shigaraki begins recruiting followers of the hero killer to his cause. Among them is a mysterious patched-up young adult, rude and cold, immediately ready to fight. Dabi's first appearance happened at a time when the fandom wasn't really at its peak yet, the anime hadn't even been announced, and while the manga was enjoying success, it was nothing compared to what was to come. Due to this, I couldn't really find any indications of fans were already theorizing on who this guy was, and it's easy to see why they wouldn't. This scene doesn't really give us much, aside from a new, really cool and mysterious design and a bit of dialogue that is very anime-esque. "Ugh, you don't know who I am." We don't even get to see his quirk yet. However, there was one bit of dialogue, one phrase that would much later be used as a piece of evidence, and a juicy one at that.
今はダビで通してる。
通すな、本名だ。
出す時になったら出すさ。
The right now, along with Chiggy's reaction, makes it clear that Dabi is a fake name, which is quite exciting and would much later be used to fuel a lot of the theory crafting. What does he have to hide? Why is his name relevant enough to be brought up as a mystery? Who is he? As our heroes enjoy a summer training camp in a remote woodland area, they are besieged by the League of Villains Vanguard Action Squad, under the command of none other than Dabi. This is the first time we really get to see how this character speaks and acts, and funnily enough, this was the point in the story that begun planting the seeds for what would become a frenzy of fan theories and headcanons. For starters, readers were finally introduced to Dabi's quirk, which, while unnamed, has been referred to as cremation ever since the term coined by anime YouTuber Young Orphe was accepted and used by the fan wiki. This flame quirk, capable of burning at immense temperatures, was at first seemingly inconspicuous, due to a few differences to the other main flame users in the story. For one, the appearance. Dabi's flames were drawn completely differently than the regular orange fire of Shoto and Enji, being a darker shade and having different patterns. It's important to note that until the anime reached this arc much later, we didn't actually know the color of Dabi's fire, since no character ever mentions it until much later in the manga. I personally thought they were black when I first read it, because I like Amaterasu. Additionally, the way Dabi uses flames is quite different. While the Todorokis were capable of shooting even beams of fire, Dabi's quirk seemed to cause a sort of recoil, with him having to retract his arm after almost every blast. But while Dabi's quirk was not yet very suspicious, his behavior told a different story. While he exuded a general hatred of the pro-hero system, arguably being the first character after Stain to vocalize it, it was his final moment in this arc that really started the fire, pun intended. How sad for you, Shoto Todoroki. This moment was, even back then, quite suspicious. While Dabi's general attitude towards our heroes was a sadistic glee, Shoto was the only student he directly called out by full name. And besides just that, there is the visual composition of the page, Dabi's shadow perfectly covering Todoroki's scarred flame side. Some brush it off as just a cool page, but one thing to remember is that in both writing and art, there are no coincidences. Since artwork is almost always constructed, every single detail is a choice. Kohei Horikoshi deliberately drew and inked every bit of shadow in this image, including that on Shoto's face. Emboldened by this fact, this page remained a salient part of the Dabi experience. In fact, I would confidently say that it was this exact page that gave birth to the Dabi Todoroki theory. This now infamous theory basically assumed that Dabi was one of Endeavor's sons, turned into a villain through some means and now hell-bent on terrorizing his family. At this point, evidence for this theory was somewhat scarce, but present. Dabi has a flame quirk, Dabi hates heroes, Dabi has some sort of special interest in Shoto, and Shoto has two older brothers we, at that point, hadn't seen yet outside of flashbacks. None of those brothers had black hair, but then again, this is where Dabi's appearance in front of the beauty salon came back in. Dyeing your hair isn't an outlandish concept. It is also here where one of Dabi's introductory lines was given renewed importance. I go by Dabi right now, which to many just reaffirmed that not only was this man hiding something, but also that that something was, due to that specific focus and Dabi's growing presence in the story, quite important. This spring chapter wasn't necessarily interesting for what it did do, but rather for what it didn't do. As the United Hero Front storms the League's hideout, Gran Torino lists the names of those they arrest, one by one, each of them. Except one. Dabi. For some reason, Dabi is completely omitted from this scene, which is actually really weird. This is the government making a formal arrest, with almost infinite resources and intel at their disposal, and yet Dabi remains unidentified. More peculiar, however, is how the scene is constructed. All the big-name heroes storm into the hideout, except Endeavor, who even comments at how dumb it is that he is left outside with the police. Now, there's a bunch of good reasons why he might be left behind. His quirk and fighting style doesn't really suit indoor team battles, and his large arsenal of firepower makes him a better asset outside. However, from a narrative perspective, him being the only one left out got people thinking. Maybe this is so that he doesn't meet Dabi as a sort of future-proofing for a potential reveal of a relation between the two. If Endeavor saw Dabi, it would probably force the reveal since he should recognize him, so having the two miss each other by a hair seemed to many as an indication by Horikoshi that their meeting would be one of importance and had to be therefore saved for later. If you needed an example of just how crazy people were getting over this Frankenstein boy band motherfucker, listen to this. Chapter 160 was considered another piece of evidence for the Dabi Todoroki theory because Dabi says he's carsick and motion sickness is one of the lasting symptoms of abuse trauma.
Hey, stop!
Yeah, I know, but you gotta remember what 2017 was like. The anime had started and was airing its crazy successful second season, which caused a massive influx of new manga readers, me included. When those readers arrived, they found an already well-established pot of fan theories regarding the patch-faced man, which was further fueled by the fact that the dude hadn't appeared in the manga for almost a full year. And also, let's not beat around the bush, 2017 was also a year when Tumblr was still very active, and if there is one place that breeds the most rabid headcanons founded upon shoddy understanding of pop magazine level psychology, it was Tumblr. So, it was in this environment in which people saw Dabi wanting to barf as a confirmation of his connection to Endeavor. I'm not bringing this up because I believe this was an actual piece of evidence, it definitely wasn't, but because I want you to understand just how crazy we were for Dabi theories and tidbits. Like, there was no real harm done through this, it was kind of fun just geeking out with people about details like these. We were all having a blast, and honestly, as dumb as it was, I do cherish those days a lot. Outside of the manga, the anime now began taking its first steps into this absolute mess of a character, as episode 41 introduced the Smell Master properly, giving anime-onlys their first real look at his power set. The reason I bring this up is because this was the very first time after 2 years that we got a canonical color for Dabi's flames, deep blue. This by itself wouldn't be cause for much emotion, as it just means his flames are quite hot. But, staying true to this absolute fever dream of a plot point, this revelation sent the fandom into overdrive for one simple reason. Back in Season 2, Studio Bones was flirting with the idea of original filler, anime original content that they would clear and discuss with Horikoshi beforehand, thus making it semi-canon. And one of those anime original scenes included Endeavor fighting a Nomu using blue flames. And, well, you can imagine the rest. It didn't matter that it was filler. In fact, I'm sure some of you didn't know until right now that this scene isn't canon, because now we had both a scene of Endeavor using blue flames and the confirmation that Dabi's flames were also blue. So, as you undoubtedly already surmised, the Dabi Todoroki theory went from relatively obscure fanfiction to almost generally accepted pseudo-canon. It in fact became so mainstream because of this that we would soon see people actually try and disprove it because, of course, the moment something becomes popular, someone has to immediately dislike it because we have kind of equated being cool to being dismissive in this absolute hellscape of modernity, but I'm getting off track. Now we're getting into the juicy stuff. With the Dabi Todoroki theory having become a pretty well-known headcanon, and with the fanbase rapidly growing, it was only a matter of time until the next instance which sent the fandom into a frenzied euphoria. And it came in probably the most unexpected form imaginable. Endeavor's character arc. 2 years after the fact, it's easy to take it for granted, but I cannot tell you how incredible it was to see Horikoshi actually address Endeavor and his past through the now iconic pro-hero arc. Short, sweet, and action-packed, this mini arc was a rollercoaster from top to bottom. And it was doubly interesting for us Dabi connoisseurs because this increased focus on Endeavor naturally came with more insight into his family, and it was immediately apparent that it would be quite important to the fan theories, as the arc pretty much starts with us finally getting to see more members of the Todoroki family. Namely, we finally got to meet Natsuo, who up until this point had gone unnamed. Yeah, this theory has been brewing for 3 years at this point, and we hadn't even seen either of the male siblings yet. That's how crazy this shit was. More importantly than his name, however, was his hair color. Back during the sports festival, Shoto's brothers have been shown very briefly, with the anime later showing one of them to be white-haired while the other was red-haired. Looking at how Shoto's dichromatic hair shows which side got ice and which got fire, it was then easy to guess that the white-haired brother had ice powers from Rei, while the redhead would be a pure fire user. So now, we had Natsuo, the white-haired brother, casually appearing in the story, while his red-haired sibling, the supposed fire user, was not even mentioned. To the fans of the time, this seemed like too overt of an omission, and people went, of course, crazy. There was only one problem. The hair colors were actually anime only. In the manga, both brothers were seen to have white or at least light hair, and we know it's white and not red because Hori draws red hair fairly dark. This presented a bit of a monkey wrench, but people remain undaunted. No fan theory is complete without openly ignoring canon material that contradicts your ideas, after all. Regardless, the hype kept trucking on through the arc. As the fight against the Nomu wound down, the theorists were given another jolt, as the Patched Prince himself made an appearance, marking his first on-screen meeting with Endeavor, the latter of which is conveniently visually impaired during their encounter. Suspiciously convenient, eh? This, however, was only the beginning, as this scene ended with Dabi leaving Endeavor the same way he did Shoto, gleefully shouting his full name. Now there was a pattern, a parallelism, that Dabi established only with two members of the Todoroki family. Additionally, just like his scene with Shoto, this parting also involves visual clues. As he is engulfed by Ujiko's quirk, the teleport juice on Dabi forms a pseudo-recreation of Endeavor's flame patterns in his face. But Oceans, isn't this a huge stretch? Well, A, have you been paying attention? We were clearly insane. Reasonability is not a factor here. And B, as I said with the Shoto scene, when you have to draw every single line deliberately, coincidences are a nigh-on impossibility, so it isn't unreasonable to assume things like that based on the visuality of the scene. Before the arc ended, we received one final thing that's relevant to the theory: the missing brother's name. Natsuo mentions that he will never forgive what happened to big brother Toya. In this short phrasal segment, Natsuo gave us an immense amount of information. For one, we finally had a name. Crazy to think about, we went this long without even knowing what he was called. Also, he's the big brother, meaning he was older than Natsuo. Since Natsuo is 19, that meant that Toya had to be at least older than that. If we look at the ages of the Todoroki siblings, do you notice something? They are all about 3 to 4 years apart, which is the exact amount of time it takes on average for a child's quirk to appear. The implication here would be that after he made each kid, Endeavor would wait to see if they would manifest the perfect ice-fire mix he was looking for, before making the next one. Dark, but in character. Going off of this assumption, the theorists at the time surmised then that since Fuyume is 3 years older than Natsuo, Toya must have been the first child, putting him at around 26 years old. Lastly, we are told something bad happened to him. We don't hear any more about it, but we really didn't need to. The anime's red coloring of his hair, his age, and his unfortunate fate pretty much confirmed that Toya was probably Dabi to a lot of people. It just fit too well, with the exception of the hair color thing, especially since Dabi is black-haired, but again, clinical insanity and whatnot, so we just assumed that he probably dyes his hair or something. The joint training arc carried with it loads of characterization for much of the secondary cast, but what interests us in this context is the treatment Todoroki got. As he gears up for his match, he remembers his training with his father. In his flashback, we get the second ever mention of Toya, and even some additional information. According to Endeavor, Toya's fire burned even hotter than his, but the child unfortunately manifested the same weakness of fire in his body as his ice-using mother possessed. In short, it was implied that Toya's quirk was so strong and his body was so weak that his own quirk hurts him. Now, a fire user who is full of burns. I wonder if we've ever seen someone like that. As the bombastic My Villain Academia arc went on, Dabi ended up in a tussle with ice user Getten, who, fun fact, was for a while theorized to be Fuyumu Todoroki in disguise. Yeah, I know, we were that insane. During that fight, the observant Getten realizes something about Dabi that You guessed it, just fueled the fires even more. Getten states that Dabi's quirk hurts him and burns his flesh. Considering it had been just 28 chapters ago that we heard this exact line used to refer to Toya, the connection was easy to make. But what's even cooler is that once you found this out, if you went back through earlier parts of the manga, you could see this happening in real time. One thing that always stuck out to me was that Dabi's quirk seemed to have a different activation method than the Todoroki's. Whenever he released fire, he had to quickly retract his hand, like a recoil, what I said earlier. But now we knew that this wasn't actually a feature of his quirk, but rather him just trying not to get burnt. Really cool and satisfying to see a detail like this end up mattering. I feel rewarded when stuff like this happens. As autumn came around, My Hero Academia launched into the Endeavor Agency arc, a super fun mini arc where the Three Stooges train under Endeavor. This was cute, but also super interesting for us lunatics. That was because shortly after the arc started, the folks got invited to a dinner at the Todoroki mansion. A setting that would definitely yield new and juicy morsels about Toya. Surely enough, it happened. With a caveat. Good news, we got our first look at Toya. Bad news, Toya is dead. Yeah, as our first real look at Toya came in the form of a memorial shrine, something reserved for dead people, the Dabi Todoroki theory began shaking a bit. This was not helped by the fact that Toya clearly had white hair in the image, which to be honest started to give a lot of people, me included, the impression that the anime coloring was just a mistake that we had taken too seriously. Still, we held out hope and we were actually kind of rewarded. When Endeavor addresses the event that killed his son, he says, "I might as well have killed him myself." Not only does this mean that Endeavor didn't just actively murder a child, but it also somewhat implies that he was not present. And that leaves room for a lovely theory to breathe a few relieved breaths, because now the death could be faked or orchestrated or whatever. However, it still didn't fix the hair and it made it more ambiguous than this theory had maybe ever been. You know, as the Paranormal Liberation War arc began and raged, I think many of us kinda stopped talking about Dabi. Yeah, like sure, we still had a lot of evidence, and the idea of Dabi destabilizing Hero Society by revealing Endeavor's past to the public, perhaps via video broadcast, floated around here and there, but generally, people kinda stopped caring. And I think the reason was fatigue. Many might have felt that the Dabi twist was long overdue, and that there was little Horikoshi could do to keep it interesting when it inevitably happened. I even mentioned this in a video in January. Additionally, I think some people were also dissuaded by the reveals of the Endeavor Agency arc, taking Toya's death at face value and leaving it at that. So basically, those who believed in the theory were getting sick of waiting for confirmation, and those that didn't believe in it didn't think much of it. Thus, slowly, as more interesting and pressing events took the stage, the theories surrounding Dabi just slowly faded. Until he did this! In the middle of their fight, Dabi calls Hawks by his name. Not his hero name, but his actual birth name, Keigo Takami. This is a name that Hawks left behind as a small child, when he was taken in by the Hero Association and their mysterious secret training program. To repeat, this is a name the public doesn't know because the government scrubbed it from all records. Dabi knowing this was huge, because it implied that he had some sort of connection or tunnel to the government and was, to some extent, privy to information he really should not have. And it didn't stop there. After Twice's death, Dabi does not cry, he laughs, gleefully commenting that his tear ducts were burned off ages ago. This is also the first time where it's confirmed that the marks on Dabi are actual burns. Getten did kind of soft imply it, but this is the first time we get it from the horse's mouth itself. Hawks remarks that Dabi is as much of an unknown quantity as Shigaraki, who, let's not forget, was specifically hidden by the Lord of Evil. In response, Dabi drops the now infamous black speech bubble, where he reveals something to Hawks that we don't get to see. We in fact still don't know what he said. While this is infuriating, I love the tone of the scene nonetheless. Hawk's eyes open in pure horror, and Dabi declares that out of everyone on the field today, he is the most dangerous one due to what he is, what he knows, and his desire to realize Stain's will. This scene single-handedly got us back into business. The Dabi reveal became an actual factor now, because now it was less about who he is and more so about what his plans are. Everyone kind of accepted he was Toya, but now the why was more important. After this scene, Dabi almost seemed to carry the potential to become a third party in the story, a main villain besides Shigaraki, which is the coolest shit in existence. He somehow had ties to the government and knew something that had Hawks, someone who had literally just killed a man, so shook that he didn't say a word. Dabi would continue to act suspiciously for the rest of the arc, being oddly happy about the destruction and nabbing Skeptic the tech guy for some reason. And so the arc continued, Dabi continued to laugh, and as Makia reached the main battlefield, and TV and radio stations started failing for mysterious reasons, as the arc raced towards its climax, as the League raced to reach Shigaraki and the heroes, it happened. You might think that calling this a twist is not quite right. At this point, this character and his story had been pieced together bit by bit over a period of 5 years, with dedicated and casual fans alike being at the very least aware of this possible connection. A surprise this was not. But let's consider the word twist for a moment. Does it inherently necessitate surprise? What exactly does a surprise twist? The word does indeed actually not directly reference surprise, instead denoting an event that twists a story in a new and interesting direction, although it is colloquially often conjoined with the idea of a shock or surprise. But if a twist's main goal is to alter the course of the story through consequences and implications, then the Dabi reveal does exactly that. As he washes the black dye out of his hair and announces his true identity, half a decade worth of theories finally find confirmation in one joyous moment, and I unironically love it. I don't think anyone was shocked or surprised at this reveal, as most people like me were relieved to finally have the answers to our questions and to not have to wear clown costumes. But I think surprise was clearly not the intended effect anyway. If Hori wanted to emphasize the shock of this moment, he would have probably ended the chapter here on this panel, having the reveal be a big cliffhanger. But he precisely doesn't do that, instead making the reveal a chapter-long event. This, to me at least, makes it clear that this isn't much of a reveal as much as it is a celebration. Dabi is celebrating finally being able to reveal his father's sins, while Hori is celebrating finally being able to reveal Dabi's real position in the story to us. Instead of some dramatic, moody scene of Dabi unveiling his big secret, we get him dancing and clapping like a goofball, rambling on in glee as he lists the atrocities the heroes committed. It doesn't just characterize the otherwise stoic Dabi as much more unhinged than previously believed, but also sets in motion a proverbial thematic tsunami as now hero society is at its lowest point possible. This reveal is perhaps the biggest upset the story's world has seen thus far, and I am so happy about it that a plot element I was so curious and worried about ended up getting such a phenomenal treatment. Every little detail we theorized ended up actually mattering. The saloon scene did actually foreshadow his hair dye. The anime's coloring consistency actually made sense because Toya had red hair that went white from stress. His flames burning him was indeed due to his body being weak to fire, etc, etc, etc. As a fan who has followed this particular series for years now, it felt so immensely rewarding to see all my insane ramblings finally pay off. You know, we often talk about reveals and twists like they have to completely blow your mind, but this is a perfect example of a twist that didn't surprise anyone, but it rewarded its fans for being loyal and for being attentive. And honestly, if a series can give me the feeling of building a puzzle, of finding the pieces and playing detective myself, and then confirming it happily, I am perfectly fine with that. That is a tremendously cool achievement, and I love it. And as the chapter closes on the awesome and haunting panel of Dabi declaring the past as undying, this reveal cements itself as everything I wanted and more. I understand that some might feel differently, and that's fine. I think My Hero is one of those series where your personal investment really determines how you perceive the story. But to me, this was an amazing ride from start to finish. And now that Dabi has probably entered the plot, I cannot wait to see where the story takes this crazy dude next. Personally, I am super excited for the next chapter in the Dabi experience. Because now that we know who he is, we of course must ask, what's his plan? What does he want? And why does he want it? But that, dear viewer, is a video for another day. Thank you all so much for watching and for going on this insane journey with me. I know this isn't what I usually do, but this was such a cool reveal, I just had to do something special for it. Thank you, of course, also to all our patrons, including Christian Finkbeiner, Erina, Victor Perev, Fiction Ape, Kendry Williams, Sini, Zanji1, and Mr. Meander. Thank you all so much. Have fun in life. Be happy. I'm recording this at Christmas, so Merry Christmas, even though this will probably come out like months afterwards, because, oh my god, editing's gonna be a bitch. But anyway, thank you so much. We're almost at 100k. It's insane. You can tell I'm kind of out of my mind right now. I'm tired. But take care of yourself. Wash your hands. Be safe. Bye-bye. I love you all. Bye.